So the illusion I chose to present about is the Tower of Babel, which was a biblical event that took place in the Old Testament in the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verses 1 through 9. So Noah's descendants, they migrated and decided to stay in a land called Shinar, and they were a very, very large population, and they all happened to speak the same language. They were very proud of their nation, and they wanted to show to all the other nations how powerful and how prideful they were. So they decided to make a name for themselves, and to do so, they decided to build a tower that would reach the heavens. And this really large tower was going to reach the heavens, which kind of symbolized that they were going to be able to be their own God and they would no longer need God in their own lives since they were in heavens themselves. God, seeing this arrogance and the people's behaviors, came down and he scrambled the language so that the people were no longer able to communicate with one another. And because they were no longer able to communicate with one another, they couldn't finish the tower and they weren't unsuccessful. After God scrambled the language, he scattered them across the world, which is a possible explanation for the world's diversity and the different languages that come from all over the world. What's really interesting is that Babel in Hebrew means noisy confusion, which is kind of basically, in an essence, the entire Babel story. So some common images and ideas that come from the Tower of Babel story is obviously a very large tower, something very tall, like a skyscraper, can also be an allusion to the Tower of Babel. Confusion, specifically going from being super organized and orderly, and then going into confusion, which is how the people started very organized and very successful and powerful, and because their language was scrambled, they ended up very confused. Um, Obviously, different languages and a lack of communication because the people were unable to communicate with one another. An important one is mortals playing God, which is often an allusion to the Tower of Babel, because in the story, the people wanted to reach heaven for themselves so that they didn't have to be reliant on God and they could be their own gods. An ego or power check, because when God saw the arrogance and the immense amount of hubris in the people, he came down and kind of put them in their place by scrambling their language. A desire to be powerful or well known, because the whole point of the tower, well, one of the points was for the neighboring nations to know how powerful the people in this land were, and that was one of the reasons they built the tower. A scattering or separation, which is what happened at the end of the story with God separating the people and scattering them across the face of the earth. And then finally, a relationship with man and God, and basically how a man should be in reverence to God and not try to play God themselves. Some themes we see are how it is important to remain faithful and reliant on God. So when God saw that people were going to be their own God and were no longer going to be reliant on him, he came down and scrambled the language, and so that this could no longer be the case because they were unable to finish the tower that was going to reach the heavens, which kind of goes along with the next one. Too much pride and desire, and a desire to be envied will lead to a downfall. So because the people were incredibly arrogant and full of themselves, they were disciplined by God, and that was their downfall because they were no longer able to be successful and finish their tower. An important one is one can't succeed without communication, or in other words, communication is key. So because the people could no longer communicate with one another, they were unable to be successful and finish their tower. Playing God will lead to consequences, which is a really common one when you think you're above normal man. This is especially true with lots of stories that involve scientists, that we see this illusion or theme that when they try to become too powerful or try to create something that, say, God would create, and they're playing God, that there are immense consequences. And finally, being humble and knowing one's place. So men should know that they need to be subordinate to God, and that they need to listen to God, and that they should not try to play God for themselves. A movie illusion, or an illusion that we see in another work, is in the movie Metropolis, which is a science fiction silent German film from 1927, so it's pretty old. But basically there's this post-apocalyptic utopia where there are two very distinct social classes, the upper class and the lower class. And the upper class lives above the city and is really rich and fancy with lots of buildings and success and money and power. And then the lower class lives below the city. And their job is to run these machines day and night to keep the above city running. So they are kind of doing all the work to keep the people, the upper class, happy. So in the story, the main tower above that is above in the above city is called the New Tower of Babel, which is obviously a very direct allusion to the Tower of Babel in the Bible. This tower and the allusion to Babel shows the immense arrogance and pride that the upper class people have, which is similar to the arrogance that the people in the Bible showed when they were building their tower. The allusion is further used to show that there's an extreme disconnect between the levels because they are both physically separated, one class being above the city and one class being below, but they are also very disconnected in the way they think and act and just their situations in general. And so there's this disconnect, which leads to a lack of communication, which is seen in the Tower of Babel and the Bible. And because of this lack of communication, there becomes lots of strife and tension between the two groups and a general lack of communication. And because of this lack of communication and the tension that is seen between the classes, the city is unable to succeed. And in the end, lots goes wrong because they're not able to come together as one. So this is, again, an allusion to the Tower of Babel in the Bible, where after the groups of people are unable to communicate, they are not able to succeed. Here are my works cited, and thank you guys for listening.